Today, we're going to be talking about 3 different Kizer knives that are probably my favorite. Before we get into those, let me do one honorable mention. That's the Kizer Shamshir. This knife is pretty awesome, even though I'm not a huge fan of this upswept blade, but it's actually such a good knife in hand. It feels really, really nice. The action is great, and in typical Kizer fashion, they nailed a titanium frame lock like they always do. But today, we're going to be talking about the Kizer Sheepdog, specifically in Micarta with the opening hole. This is the 154 cm version. If you can get the 10V version, that's probably a little bit more recommended than this one, but I'm perfectly content with my 154 cm. Next, we have the Kizer T1. I'm pretty sure you can only get this from a Hobby Outdoors, but I could be wrong. Last, we have the Kizer T1 in titanium and S35 VN. The reason I'm showing all 3 of these together is because long lasting has been my Kizer Sheepdog as my favorite Kizer. And maybe one of the best budget knives for under 80 bucks. Then they came out with the Kizer T1 in Micarta. Again, 154 cm, basically everything that the Sheepdog has, but a different style, more neutral, more EDC friendly. And obviously, this design was based on their original Kizer T1 in titanium and S35. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you which one's my favorite, and I want you in the comments below to tell me which one is your favorite Kizer, and it doesn't have to be limited to these 3. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of these 3 knives, let's just show off some of the action. This action is so ultra smooth, it is silly. Here's the Micarta T1. It makes a lot more clicks and clacks, but it's not quite as smooth on the drop as its titanium counterpart. Lastly, the Sheepdog, very easy to reverse flick, and due to this heavy blade, it does have this drop shut nature and it gives that weird acoustic that feels good. I actually think I prefer fidgeting with this, maybe over the Micarta T1, and maybe over the titanium T1 as well. Because they're so similar, let's talk about these 2 first. Obviously, these are both the same design, so in hand, ergonomically, they feel very, very similar. There's not much difference. I will say, this fold-over pocket clip on the Micarta is felt more than the titanium pocket clip on the titanium version. It doesn't have a fold-over, but I can kind of feel this little sharp point right here on this pocket clip, whereas the only part of this one I feel is this rounded off, folded over section. So this affects you more at the bottom of your hand, whereas this one kind of hits you in the middle just a little bit. I would say the one on the titanium is less annoying than the one on the Micarta. Next, we have the S35 versus the 154 cm blades. For all purposes' sake, S35 does beat out 154 cm. If we were talking CPM 154 based on knife steel nerds, then it would be a little bit different story. But because we're talking about 154 and not the CPM version, both in toughness and edge retention, S35 takes it down all day. As far as corrosion resistance, S35 is still a little bit better, but not by much. Again, guys, all these little differences between the steels are relatively minute, and the everyday person probably won't even notice. As you would expect, the titanium version's slightly heavier, coming in at a 4.3 ounces, while the Micarta version's coming in at a 3.64. That's about 3/4 of an ounce difference between the 2. If that matters to you, then there's that data. To me, it doesn't make a difference. What I did find relatively unique is that the titanium version is a little bit thinner, coming in at a 0.46 inches, while the Micarta version's coming in at a 0.51 inches thick. I'm talking handle width right here. So if you like a little bit thicker of a knife, then you'd probably steer more towards the Micarta. Me personally, I still enjoy the titanium feel in hand, and I kind of prefer the thinner knives most of the time. So the titanium would be my preference in this case. Real quick, we can talk about carry of these 2. Obviously, the Micarta version is going to carry a little bit deeper in your pocket due to this fold-over clip. This would be the difference sticking out of your pocket if you had both of these. Both of these blade stocks are pretty much the same. I did notice that behind the edge thickness is a couple thousandths more on the titanium version than the Micarta, and you do kind of notice it in use. The Micarta does slice a little bit better, but again, only if you were comparing the two side by side. Last, but certainly not least for these two, would be the price difference. The Micarta version's coming in at a very low $80, while the titanium version's coming in at a whopping $175. Now, both of these I think are great prices for what you're getting, but they're both kind of the same knife. One's a liner lock with Micarta and 154 cm, while the other one is a titanium version. You really have to like titanium frame locks, in my opinion, to justify that price difference, which again, if it was me, I think I would. But I have a preference for titanium frame locks. But the Kizer T1 in Micarta was so good and such a good price point that I did feel the need to compare it to the Kizer Sheepdog in 154 cm with the opening hole. Now these are basically the same materials, guys. Yes, the Micarta is a slight different variation. This one feels more of a canvas Micarta, where this might be closer to a linen Micarta. But they are both stainless steel frame locks with 154 cm on the blade. Their spine thicknesses are the exact same, coming in at 115 thousandths. The behind the edge on the Sheepdog is a couple thousandths thinner, and I do actually prefer slicing with this more, as it does fill out the hand pretty darn well. The T1 is no slouch though, and it still fills out your hand great. It just doesn't feel as ergonomically sound as the Sheepdog due to the width of the scales of the Sheepdog itself. Both the Sheepdog and the T1 are coming in at around $80, and I think that puts both of these in the Budget King category. If you choose the Sheepdog, you get a little bit bigger of a blade. Doesn't necessarily mean it's more hard use, but you get to do more box breaking down tasks and more long slicing driving tasks with, in my opinion, slightly better ergonomics, but they are not neutral. This is not a neutral grip. This is basically the only place that you can hold this knife. You can choke up, but it doesn't feel great. The T1 is very, very neutral. You can kind of move up and down the handle as you want, and it's kind of that generic knife. So you're going to be able to do more versatile tasks, but it's not going to do any one task as good as, say, this sheep's foot blade does when it comes to breaking down boxes or things of that nature. I know this is going to kill Jake a little bit on the inside, but I still prefer the Kizer Sheepdog over the T1. This has nothing to do with the actual T1's design, or that I think the T1's worse than the Sheepdog itself. That has to do with is my own personal preference. So after showing off all three of these knives, I do think I would still prefer the Kizer Sheepdog over the other two. But it's very hard to say that these are not excellent, excellent knives. And I also understand that the aesthetic of the Sheepdog itself might be the turnoff right away. Whereas the other two have that neutral folding knife look that when you pull them out, might not actually make Susie over there on the other side of the cafeteria scream that you just pulled out a knife, because they just look normal. Where the Sheepdog does, it has a different aesthetic. So as I said in the beginning, let me know in the comments below what your favorite Kizer is and why. And it doesn't have to be limited to these three.